Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, July 24th, 2020. Made it to another Friday. Not that that has ever meant anything in the Trump era. It only means more chaos over the weekend, usually, and more insanity to have to round up come Monday. But it's okay. It's all right. It's okay. That's okay. I feel like Donald Trump saying it that way. Everything gets dismissed this way. Daily Kos Radio is live now. We are reliably informed by Bill all the way from Portland, Maine. And here's what he thinks we've got on tap today. And he's right, at least in the outset. This morning, Kagro X, me, David Waldman, welcomes special guest Ian Reifowitz, which I do. I welcome him with open arms. Well, I can't do that, of course, during the COVID-19 epidemic, but doesn't matter. We're doing it socially distanced as usual via Skype. Also, unidentified armed thugs may storm in and steal all the donuts. That's perfectly normal, and it's perfectly fine. That's what armed thugs do when they storm into an area, usually under the color of law enforcement. Stealing the donuts, I think, traditionally is what they're supposed to do. And so all is well. We're fine here, and we're fine. Everything's fine here. How are you? This is a boring conversation. Of course, it doesn't include Ian yet. We'll wrap things up with our kickoff and let our music play out. Get ourselves situated. Let Ian get situated, and we'll give him a call. He's been active as usual as a Daily Kos contributor. He's had two rather interesting pieces up in the last couple of days. And as I recall, he said there's yet another coming down the pike. One very lengthy examination of the interesting dynamics of racism, bigotry, jealousy, hatred, political intrigue, all sorts of, a part of, every one of them, a part of the difficult minefield of issues to navigate surrounding the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And interestingly, it has brought along with it, and I don't think you can say coincidentally, but we wish we could dismiss it that easily. It brought along with it a fresh wave of, re-examination of bigotry of all kinds, of course. And that's one of the better aspects of raising consciousness the way the Black Lives Matter movement has done. We become more conscious of the victimization of all minorities. Although it's a relative thing, that's true. But there have been such very interesting fallout from the resurgence of interest in the mainstream of America on the issues brought to the fore by Black Lives Matter and related movements. Of course, we've seen the change. It hasn't come out all that well, PR-wise necessarily, but the change in the, for instance, in the name of the Washington football team from the one we called the Washington Breadsticks for so many years because their name was offensive, to the very creative Washington football team. That's actually what happened. Apparently, they've announced that for the 2020 season, they will be known as the Washington football team officially. They just will pick no team nickname or mascot. So that was kind of interesting. It's what sportscasters have been have forced to call them over the last couple of years as they became more sensitized to the issue surrounding the team nickname. For lack of any other name, they called them the Washington football team. And I guess for lack of, I don't know what, they probably couldn't settle on a name that satisfied everybody. Team owner Dan Snyder, majority owner Dan Snyder, is notoriously difficult to satisfy and fickle as well. And so they probably couldn't settle on anything and just decided to go with the Washington football team for now. I don't know if they faced any sort of deadline from the league for submitting something for official scheduling purposes or what, but they couldn't come up with anything. because they're such creative geniuses. Dan Snyder, by the way, made his fortune in public relations and communications before going on to fame and greater fortune as the owner of the Redskins. And so I don't know what happened there. A little bit of a break. He's lost his skills, if he ever had any. All right. So plenty to talk about, plenty to round up. There's things still happening in Portland. Appears to be getting worse than the president now promising to send something. I guess he's put a number on it. He called into Fox News this morning, if I understand this correctly, and put a number to it saying that he was prepared to dispatch another 75,000 of these unidentified and unidentifiable, maybe federal employees, maybe not, goon squad members to cities around the country. I don't know that he has the personnel. I don't know who he's drawing on. But then again, if we're not certain that they are even federal personnel, it may be that there is a greater reserve of people to call upon for this. I know it's been very popular in the last couple of days to ask, where are all the stockpilers of ammunition and AR-15s who swore that they were putting these arsenals together to oppose possible government tyranny? And here is government tyranny, and why aren't they out on the front lines opposing it? And I think the answer is maybe that's where the 75,000 troops will come from. And who knows whether these are professionals, amateurs, cosplayers. There's just no way of telling. We'll see if we can't unravel all this. Other interesting news, I guess I'll just mention quickly before giving Ian a call, and maybe this is something we can talk about, because perhaps it relates to some of his chosen topics of his writing over the last couple of days, tangentially, I suppose. I'm curious about the news that Stephen Miller, the White House Nazi, the White House's most famous Jewish Nazi, certainly, who has declared, well, a couple of things. This morning he declares that the federal forces occupying Portland should be celebrated as heroes. This, according to what I've seen from Talking Points memo. About that, I am sure that he was quoted in discussion with someone other than Talking Points memo, but I'm glad they brought this to my attention. Going with, it's a curious play going with the greeted as liberators line. That one did not work out very well for the Bush administration and Iraq, but I guess he's lazy and has chosen to go with that play. He also has been in the news in the last day or two over, reports, this one brought to us by Mother Jones, if I recall correctly, although now it's not as easy to find. There it is. Stephen Miller's grandmother died of COVID-19, not, unusual, certainly in these times. Her son blames the Trump administration, which also is not unusual in these times. But of course, Stephen Miller works for the Trump administration and is the chief architect, it said, of some of its worst policies. And apparently there's some hard feelings in the Miller family about that. But Miller makes an interesting case. And the fact that he signed on with the Trump administration at all, but then to sign on to their policies, as the architect of the policies on immigration, for instance, caged babies portion of the policy, and anything that's exceedingly cruel. And it's easy to feel like you can see his fingerprints on the COVID-19 response, where, the response has generally been, let the grandparents die. It'll be good for the economy. Of course, it's been terrible for the economy. So we've lost both the economy and the grandparents. And Stephen Miller, I guess, still content to play the role of the concentration camp capo here and deliver up his own grandmother. But apparently, the White House, for whatever reason, political reasons, has been denying that she did, in fact, die of COVID-19, though that's what it says on her death certificate. And apparently they've even disputed the date of the death, so you know how they are. They wanted Barack Obama's birth certificate. We have already, apparently, according to reports, seen the death certificate for his grandmother, but I guess it's part of their narrative. They have to pretend that that didn't happen and it didn't impact their family directly, even though his new wife, Katie, who came into the bargain as a Waldman, though in no relation, thankfully, to my own branch, but she also, I guess, caught COVID-19 rather famously about, well, I don't know, I guess we're going on 2 months ago now. I never really heard about what her condition was afterwards, but apparently unfazed by illness and death, Stephen Miller barrels on forward, endorsing the federal occupation of Portland and hoping that they'll be greeted as liberators. All right, let's shift gears. We'll save the breaking news stories and other things that we haven't gotten to during the week for later as we call Ian. We'll dial him up and see if we can't make that connection, just because Skype's been acting up lately. You know, you never know how things are going to go when others call in. Lots of ringing. All right, here we go. I think we're all set now. Ian, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How are you? I'm doing well, David. How are you?
Okay. As best as well as I could be expected in these trying times, as they say. And I'm not trying to sell you a Mazda or anything.
No.
Now when people say that to me, I feel like I must be watching a commercial or hearing a pitch when people tell me about these trying times or in these unprecedented days or what have you.
Yeah, I did notice that recently. These companies are all trying to look as if they are sensitive to what's going on.
Yes, well, that's their job, and it has been interesting watching them sell items that really don't appear to make any particular sense when you're locked in your house, like a car, to leave and go places that you're not allowed to go. But, selling is, or as they say, the business of America is business, which, that's what the old, I guess eventually we'll get around to canceling Calvin Coolidge as well.
Calvin.
Yes.
Calvin, as terrible as he was actually the last really pretty good Republican president on race.
Really?
Yeah, granted, that's not saying much given who came after him.
Right, true.
But he actually gave some really good speeches, sort of in the deep recesses of my brain right now, sorry. But he gave some good speeches on race, actually.
That is interesting.
And I don't know that he did very much. I don't remember him doing anything in particular, but he yeah. Anyway,
that's part
sorry,
of course.
Sorry.
No, that's actually an interesting tidbit to throw in there. I don't know if I certainly wouldn't have thought that he'd be first in line to possibly be redeemed by, even rhetorically redeemed. Right. I guess I figured, well, that would have been a tough era to, speak out and secure the nomination of a major party as a white person.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No. Yeah. Do you want to go into the weeds on the Democratic nomination of 1924?
Yes. Let's do that.
No, the convention actually was there was a huge Klan faction at the convention, and they really tried to get their guy nominated. The name escapes me, but I think it was a guy from Indiana. And in the end, they nominated a lawyer, or a random lawyer. I want to say his name was John Davis, who had never held office, but was sort of halfway toward the Klan and compromise between the anti-Klan and the pro-Klan and the Klan member candidate anyway. And so
okay, well,
give Calvin Coolidge credit for that.
I guess so. I mean, there's an instance where I guess the obvious play was, I think we can outflank them to the left here.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I am a historian. I'm sorry. I can't resist these things.
That's what makes the conversation interesting. And all right, well, I'll look into that. I never really gave too much. Well, I don't think anybody really gave much thought to Calvin Coolidge. But
no, and it's a lot. It's not too hard to be better than the other Republican presidents on race since then.
Yeah. Well, okay.
George W. Bush, whatever.
Right. Well, sure. And although it was hard to top Bush, that's true. I keep thinking back to early in the Obama administration talking about how we can't just dismiss what just happened, or we could get something even worse. And how most people thought, really, honestly, what could be worse?
Nah.
And it didn't seem far-fetched, and even with the threat of possibly Jeb Bush being the next Republican president, which I guess people thought was most likely at the time, even though I guess, 2009, maybe we didn't realize that, but and I don't think anybody saw Mitt Romney necessarily coming either, but he wouldn't have been nearly as bad. But Donald Trump was just a TV guy. There was no, even though he occasionally flirted with the idea of running for president, just because he's egomaniac. That's what egomaniacs say about themselves. I should be president. Anyway, that's very interesting.
It was far-fetched, yet we managed to fetch him.
we certainly did, or someone fetched him and brought him to us, and now we seem to be stuck with him. And of course, that can easily lead us to either of the two directions that we have that you've suggested in terms of your most recent writing. You sent me two of your articles, and I believe you said you have a third in the works. Is that right?
I do.
Okay.
It's in draft form right now, but it goes through the editing process. But the tentative headline is just imagine what we could be doing on COVID if Trump hadn't given away billions in tax cuts to the rich.
Well,
so I think you get the sense of where I'm going with that one.
I think so. It's a very descriptive headline. Yeah, and I'm sure everyone has imagined that. And lately people have been imagining, imagine if we had, say, pursued testing and tracing with the vigor that we have pursued occupying Portland or something like that. Sending possibly federal employees of some kind to just simply roll in and take over the place, but not do anything, productive while they were there. Just beat people up, more or less, and, okay, it might be nice if they were testing people and teaching them how to get out from underneath this pandemic instead. Now, let's see. What I think this brings to mind first, I've got your two pieces here. This might be a good segue to the first one I have open, with the title of which is, "So a Friend Said, But the Democrats Are Just as Bad." And I guess people have heard this, and I'm sure that they get a hint from the title here of what this is all about. Extraordinarily difficult, I think, in the face of complete failure in the face of a global pandemic, making America's response, which would ordinarily be the hope of the world, I think, in terms of where can we go for information and therapeutics and treatment to get out from underneath this disease, but instead we've fallen off the ladder completely. And at the same time, race relations deteriorating and, federal occupation of Portland. Hard to imagine how anybody could look and say that would be likely to happen under the Democrats and in much the same way. And yet people have done that? Or are we thinking that this is a straw that finally breaks these people, or what?
Well, hey, Obama wore a tan suit once.
He did do that, right. And I saw another one in the White House, in the Oval Office just the other day, except it was a white guy. So that seems to have fixed it.
I will say that this was something that happened on Facebook. You think nothing ever productive happens from posting on Facebook. But this exchange did lead to me putting together this post, which actually surprisingly became my all-time most recommended post on the site, right? Which I was shocked at. 918 recommends. Not to get to, even if somebody who's been on the site as long as I am could get a little excited for that many recommends.
That is interesting. I guess a lot of people are running into this, even now.
I guess so. Look, it's all stuff that I think anybody who's listening to your show and is well informed would know. But I decided, look, I wanted to try to put the argument in the biggest possible terms without getting into the weeds and without getting into ideology. Even though I think you and I can agree on certain ideological stances being superior, certain democratic ideological stances being superior, I didn't want to go there because, look, one could argue that X, Y, and Z about race or LGBT rights or whatever. Well, I just disagree with that. So I thought let's get to the kind of thing that would appeal to the most sort of independent whatever type person, for whatever it's worth, and also to the person who may not be that into the knowledgeable about the details, not to go too far into the weeds. So I said, look, let's just look at the performance of the last two Republican presidents and the last two Democratic presidents. What have we gotten from the Republican presidents? We had the most disastrous foreign policy blunder in our history, right? Bush invading Iraq. The most incompetent response to a natural weather disaster in our history, Bush and Katrina, followed closely by Trump and Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Or, right? The worst economic crash since the Depression, right? Bush in 2008.
Right.
And now, COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, again, say what you want, but we clearly have the worst death rates in the developed world. And no objective observer can deny those numbers. I said these are all things that were completely under the control of those presidents. These were not like an attack on our soil like 9/11, which whatever you want to say about Bush and the presidential daily briefing, he didn't choose to have 9/11 happen, right? But these are all things that I cited were all things that they chose to do. They chose to respond to Katrina the way they did. They chose to respond to Hurricane Maria on down the line. I said, okay, so these are the things that the Republican presidents have given us. What have the Democratic presidents given us in return? Well, in Clinton's presidency, no major blunders of anywhere near approaching this kind of level, and he turned the largest deficits in history into surpluses. Right?
Yes.
Great. By the way, the first surpluses the federal budget has seen since Lyndon Johnson, another Democratic president. And then he handed Bush those surpluses, which he blew on tax cuts for the millionaires.
Yeah.
Obama, what did he do? Well, he turned around the worst economic crash since the Depression and handed his successor an economy that was creating jobs like a machine. And at the same time, he expanded health care to millions of people. And there were no new wars of any significance, certainly,
not new,
that were
anyway.
Created under those two Democratic administrations. I said, look at these two things, look at these two lists. How can you not tell me that Democratic presidents aren't better for the country than Republicans?
I can't, but did he? Was there any effort at response, or I'm curious. That's not covered, but maybe not.
No.
I'll quit.
And I wasn't surprised because I knew where I was going. The person I was talking to is not necessarily a person who was going to respond to this. Okay. People who say, well, both parties are the same. Whatever. But I was writing for everybody else who might be reading on that site, and then I thought it would be worth putting up on Daily Kos so that readers could maybe get some use out of this. And if they are talking to people who are really more open-minded, middle of the roaders, maybe we could swing a few votes. It isn't that the whole point of being on Daily Kos? We can do whatever small thing we can to help push the country in a more progressive direction, which for the most part means winning elections. And to some degree also influencing people once they're in office. But right now it's all about winning elections. So I thought, I'll do my part.
Why not? Well, apparently it's rang a bell for people, and some 918 have decided it was important enough to recommend, and maybe they're making use of the same arguments in places where people do want to have a response. It's helpful to have there. It is really amazing. Occasionally you run into people who have just had too much of the Kool-Aid, and then they usually return with, you say there's no major scandals, but what about Solyndra? And so they're convinced that something horrible had happened during both the Clinton and Obama administrations. But it is a really remarkable hallmark of the last couple Republican administrations. And even now, as we're moving through this one, I just happened to see something this morning, as Trump was on TV suggesting that he would deploy more, maybe federal agents to help other cities get control of problems that they don't have. And apparently the number must have been ballpark, because he, in usual Trump fashion, said 50 to 75,000. That's a pretty big variance, of course, and it's a large number. And he declared that if he did that, one of his favorite throwaway lines, we can solve these problems so fast, which struck me about, this is like probably the fifth or sixth major problem that he's insisted he could fix so fast. He was going to build the wall, and we have 3 miles of that. But that was the promise on health care. It's so easy, and I'm going to have such a beautiful health care plan. And we're in the middle of another countdown. I understand Karen Tumulty tracking his comments. We have 9 days left on his most recent promise to introduce and actually to sign into law somehow a comprehensive health care plan that he had waiting in the wings, and just wasn't another one of those, just wait and see, 2 weeks, we'll have it. But it's got to be the 15th time he's said so. And,
it's going to be so fast and so beautiful, nobody will believe it.
That's right. And so far, that's correct. No one has believed it yet, and there's no reason to believe it now. But I guess it's just another one of those things where he throws stuff out, and you'd think that reporters by now might be conditioned to understand that when he says things that flatly and punctuates it with "it's going to be so easy," that means it's not going to happen. He hasn't thought it through. And,
he's got to get through infrastructure week first.
That's true. We've got to have some infrastructure to carry these 50 to 75,000 federal agents to these various cities. They can't just walk there. So we may have to wait. But, I hope that that's the case, and that his inept approach to everything means that these people never arrive in these cities, although he has apparently left it up to people who may or may not legally occupy the offices from which they're executing this strategy, but they seem more capable of delivering these people, whoever they are. We just have to find out who they are and where they came from before we decide whether they can be credited with a success or even it being a federal policy at all. We still really, literally don't know who it is arriving in these cities to supposedly enforce the law. But we can dig into that, certainly. And we'll come back, though. We've got another major topic after this break of your much considerably longer piece coming up. And let's see, we can kind of preview that one. Title-wise, every black voice calling out anti-Semitism helps, especially when black voices spew the hate. So not a new phenomenon, but a recurrence, I think, of an old phenomenon that you examine here. We'll be back in 2 minutes and dedicate the segment, if you'd like, to that piece. And, I think you'll all find it very interesting. Hang on with us, and we'll be right back with Ian. Thanks. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Ian Reifowitz still with us after the break. I wanted to move on to this other piece. It's rather intricate, and so there's a lot to it. I thought we would dedicate, at least give over the possibility of the segment to it. Every black voice calling out anti-Semitism helps, especially when black voices spew the hate. It's been an extraordinary time for the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of spotlights, and some have done very well with the spotlight, and others have wandered, I guess. And but what an interesting phenomenon this is. You want to take us through the thought behind the piece and what's been going on and bring us up to speed?
Sure. So some of these things are probably known, to the audience, and some haven't been.
Yeah, some very famous.
Have been less well known. So I sort of tried to do a recap and then some analysis. And I started out by saying up front, listen, we're going to talk about what's been going on with essentially black celebrities and anti-Semitism, but let's make something clear up front, which is the greater danger in terms of anti-Semitism right now in the United States is coming from the right wing. It's coming from white nationalists, those who are influenced at least to some degree by Trump. You saw the Pittsburgh murderer who killed 11 people in the Tree of Life synagogue on the basis of the misguided notion that immigration is a terrible thing because it's bringing in more brown people and Jews are to blame for that, right? So that's clearly the greater danger, but that doesn't mean it's the only danger. But I wanted to make that clear up front. So then over the last few weeks, really since the beginning of June, there have been just sort of one after another of these incidents. Ice Cube is the first one, and I'm not going to go into the details of what they said. Ice Cube put out a bunch of anti-Semitic crap, and Ice Cube has a long history of doing this, and we'll come back to that in a second. But then you got some really fairly apolitical people, and that's in some ways even scarier. You had Deshaun Jackson of the Philadelphia Eagles sharing some images and putting up some anti-Semitic rhetoric on his social media feed, one of which was a quote that he attributed to Hitler. You would think at this point in 2020, most people would know that if you're quoting Hitler, you're on some dangerous ground. And actually, the quote wasn't even one by Hitler, but whatever. It was about Jews. You can imagine. Okay.
Right.
And then people stepped up to defend Deshaun Jackson. One of his defenders was actually Stephen Jackson, no relation, who sadly was a very close friend of George Floyd. And his defense of Stephen Jackson also included some more anti-Semitic language about Jews and money and banks and the Rothschilds. So even in defending
that sort of thing,
Deshaun Jackson against anti-Semitism, Stephen Jackson brought in more anti-Semitism. So this is one after another. Then you had Nick Cannon more recently, who is a host of a number of shows in various formats. He came out with anti-Semitic rhetoric. He had a podcast with, you might remember, a guy named Professor Griff, if you are familiar with the history of the late 1980s. He was a member of Public Enemy, who was fired from Public Enemy for making some very racist comments about Jews, anti-Semitic comments about Jews. Well, like a bad penny, he keeps coming back. Nick Cannon, for some godforsaken reason, had him on his show, and the two of them exchanged some conversation about Jews and banks and media and whatever.
I guess to do that.
So a series of bad stuff. Now, before we go into any further, right? Thankfully, after a little bit of time, all three of these men gave real and sincere apologies, and that's important. And each of them took steps to make it right. Without going into detail, it's in the article, but I give credit to all three of them. Then, unfortunately, Nick Cannon shared that he'd been getting backlash from African Americans for taking these positive steps to apologize. Why don't you stand strong? But so I think one of the points that I made in the article is that forgetting, even beyond Ice Cube, and Ice Cube, by the way, did not. Ice Cube doubled down and tripled down, but we'll come back to him in a second. The fact that these other guys who are not political, we're not talking about David Duke here. We're not talking about, politically active haters. Which on the right, the people in the white nationalist movement. These are apolitical people who, unprompted, post anti-Semitic crap or say anti-Semitic crap. But that's even scarier in some ways. It's almost like it's one thing to it's one thing to test people who are showing symptoms and see that some of them have COVID. It's another thing to test people who are asymptomatic and show that they have COVID. Right? That tells you COVID is really spread. These are people who are asymptomatic in terms of being haters.
You find out, we're worried that this illness may run deeper than we think and more people than we think.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so having said all that, the title of the post was also praising the voices who have spoken out. So that's really the other piece that's important. So when these things first started happening, there sadly wasn't much pushback. To give credit, Roxane Gay, who is a really good writer, very active in social media. She writes for the New York Times. She's an author of multiple books, very strong on issues of race and gender. She responded right away to Ice Cube and was, with multiple tweets saying this is terrible. And, and when people in her feed tried to say, oh, maybe he didn't mean this. Oh, maybe she read back. No, she said, wrong. She said, Ice Cube's been doing this for decades, and this is anti-Semitic crap. So to give her credit, she did it right away. That was a little quieter maybe, but then after the Deshaun Jackson thing, which was big because it intersected sports and media, so all of the sports people and all the media people, sports media people were talking about it. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote a big piece, and I think he really opened the floodgates. He wrote an op-ed piece in the Hollywood Reporter saying, where's the outrage about anti-Semitism in the media? And he talked about Ice Cube and Deshaun Jackson and Steven Jackson, and he also did a little bit of bringing in some of the recent right-wing anti-Semitism that had come out there, and he made it. He didn't just specifically only talk about black celebrities, but he made this point that, hey, why is this not here? Why is this outrage not here? If you had a similar kind of open hate towards African Americans, the entire media would be all over these people. So that was an important thing to say. It is, by the way, interesting, certainly, to note that Nick Cannon did really suffer some consequences. He lost some of his employment opportunities, and that is neither here nor there. But hopefully, this will open people's eyes to the fact that this is not something you want to do. In the same way, it's opening white people's eyes who are losing positions that they don't want to be spreading hate either. So Kareem Abdul-Jabbar writes this piece, and then other people started speaking out as well. You had a couple of NFL. Specifically Pittsburgh Steelers, and Pittsburgh is important because it was the site of the Tree of Life massacre. Yes. A couple of Steelers made really positive videos with unequivocal, none of this sort of like, and that was the other piece, was the equivocation, but they were unequivocal in their condemnation of what happened, and they talked about Pittsburgh, and they talked about not wanting to build yourself up by tearing down other groups, especially other vulnerable groups. Charles Barkley posted a video, and a number of other people posted videos. Then a number of journalists wrote some really great and revealing and insightful pieces. Jamel Hill did this. She talked about how she learned from an experience of having, 10 years ago, in an offhand remark, not a terrible, hateful remark, but in an offhanded remark, having sort of used something about the Holocaust as a sort of a segue into something else. Oh. And she said, I learned from that. And she said, this is really important and we can't do that. And then Elsie Granderson wrote a really nice piece. He talked about having been attracted to Farrakhan as a younger man and then learning, hey, that's and Obama had talked about, at least a little bit of a degree, his own evolution on that. If you read Dreams from My Father, which is a wonderful book, obviously. And that they talked about what they learned and how this kind of hate is unacceptable. And the equivocation piece was important too, because, you had some who responded to Deshaun Jackson not necessarily by defending him, and this was one NFL player in particular, Malcolm Jenkins, who's a real leader on race, and he said, listen, essentially this is a distraction, and he said, we've got a lot of work to do, and this ain't it. And there was that was sort of a different response, not necessarily defending the hate, but basically saying, listen, this is not important. Sorry. And this also is offensive, right? This idea that combating anti-Semitism is important, that Jews don't really matter. Is essentially saying, listen, because African Americans are fighting a righteous fight against anti-Semitism, essentially, if a few of us, do something that's harmful or hurtful, we can't worry about that. Well, no, you have to worry about it because hate is harmful. Period. It's harmful to individuals and groups who are targeted by it, and that hate can lead to violence, and that is important. Does it have to be the thing that every person wakes up every day and spends 24 hours a day? No, I understand that, but to dismiss it is equally bad. My larger argument was, at first there was this sort of tepid response, but now in more recent days we are seeing a really positive response, and we want to recognize both of those things, because I can tell you that when it first started happening with Ice Cube, and then especially with Deshaun Jackson, you saw in the media, people like Mitch Albom, who wrote an article about this for the Detroit Free Press, but also I saw it in social media and other places, Jews saying, hey, what's going on here? Why is nobody saying anything? Rightfully, when somebody, has a picture of themselves in blackface, there's a huge outcry, but, from 10 years ago. But here's somebody right now quoting Hitler and saying Jews are evil. And nobody seems to be doing anything about it. So that's scary to Jews, right? And then also for me, I'm saying I don't want this idea to become even more cemented among Jewish Americans than it already is. This idea that, hey, it comes from Farrakhan. Black people aren't going to really have our back. We don't want that idea to send. We don't want that wedge to be there. So when I saw people like Roxane Gay and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and these other folks, Charles Barkley, when I saw them stepping forward, I wanted to write something that both brought it to the Daily Kos audience, both the fact that there was this anti-Semitism out there, which is harmful and needs to be exposed, and that there are black people standing up and saying exactly what any good ally would say. And my hope is that by spreading all of that, the good gets out there and doesn't get lost, because believe me, the bad is getting heard. The bad is getting heard. And if people are not seeing the broader media, and they may not have come across what somebody like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said, they're going to, that opens the door for the right wing to do the kind of BS driving of a wedge between Jews and blacks, because it's real. Farrakhan is harmful, both in what he says and because he gives Republicans and right-wingers an opening to say, look, African Americans really don't care about you Jews. Why don't you come with us? And that would be a disaster for Jewish Americans, for African Americans, and for America. And then, of course, there's the simple fact that spreading hate is itself direct harm. I mean, sadly, there is violence being done against Jews. There are hate crimes being committed against Jews. The majority of the blood is being shed by people associated with the right wing, but some of that blood is being shed by people of color, and some of that blood is being shed by African Americans. You have that string of cases in New York, in the New York area in late 2019, some of which were committed by whites and some of which were committed by African Americans. The rabbi who was killed in Monsey, New York, was killed by a mentally ill African American. Now, and there's a perfect example. This is somebody who's mentally ill and fixates on hate. Well, which hate does the mentally ill person fixate on? He fixates on the hate that he's exposed to, and this person was exposed to anti-Semitic hate.
Right, and so it can't be left to lie anywhere unchecked, because you never know who's going to pick up on it.
Right, and none of these things change the fact, obviously, that we are in a large fight against systemic racism and white supremacy, and the fact that Jewish Americans are a part of the fight. They've been a part of the civil rights fight for decades, giving their own lives in some cases, as I mentioned. And also, as white Americans, Jews do benefit from white privilege in important ways, and that's something that has to be acknowledged and worked on. All of those things matter, but this matters too. This matters too. And I think that was the point I wanted to make. And more importantly than me making it, doesn't mean very much for me as a Jewish person to say anti-Semitism is bad. What else am I going to say? But it's important to show that there were these strong black voices saying it too. I don't want to say that makes it a happy ending, but it seals up, I would hope, it seals up the opening so that the right wing can't exploit the wedge between blacks and Jews that I was talking about earlier, that they really do want to exploit.
Yeah, and of course it would be to their benefit. Any wedge that they can drive anywhere against, and they'll only be typically interested in driving wedges in between coalitions that are able to wield some power and that work.
Right. I mean, and one other point I made was, African Americans and Jewish Americans are the two strongest voting blocs among any ethnic or religious or cultural group, of any kind of sort of size, for Democrats in America. Yeah. African Americans are the number one in terms of the percentage that vote for Democrats, and Jews are number two. You can look at the presidential vote, congressional vote back over time, and I cite some data on this. So if you can peel off one of those two groups from the other, there's some numerical benefit in terms of votes for the Republicans, and we can't let that happen. So that was the piece, and that was the thinking behind it.
It's it's very interesting. I assume to some readers that will be a new phenomenon, just finding out that there have been such tensions, and it'll be of interest to them to see that there's a historical precedent for it, that it's been kind of a long-standing issue, but then again offers the hope that it can be mitigated in the future as it has been in the past. Overwhelmingly, it's been a minority view, but it's like the parallel that you made to COVID-19. It's something you can't let just linger unchecked. You never know who's going to pick up on it where, and certainly when people that others look up to, whether they're sports heroes or role models from other areas. Those are permission structures. We've talked about things like that on the show and probably with you as well in the past, but it sets up a permission structure. Maybe it's okay to either to have these thoughts or to just, if I never had them before, repeat the ones I just saw stated. It sounded eloquent when this person said it. That's one of the more dangerous and insidious features of that kind of rhetoric. It somehow sounds either pseudoscientific or sophisticated in some way, and that's sometimes one of the really insidious parts of conspiracy theories of all kinds. Is it makes it sound like you're very knowledgeable in the ways of the world when you reveal this information that no one else has heard of, either because, well, it's not true and that's why you've never heard of it, or whatever the situation is. But it's interesting. You got to intervene in these things. There's also, I guess, the possibility it's a tough balancing act to do, and I wondered whether maybe the initial hesitation in responding to this kind of anti-Semitic rhetoric, outside of the few examples who were quick to pick it up, like Roxane Gay here, and I wondered if initial hesitancy had something to do with the idea that, well, if we make it about, well, I guess if we centered the Jewish feelings in all of this, does it get too close to some sort of response like we often hear from the right? That, well, yes, we're in the middle of a resurgence of Black Lives Matter activism, and for good reason, but don't all lives matter? For instance, and that right immediately that raises eyebrows, and that you've stepped into dangerous ground here. But it seems to me that the argument that was being made, particularly, I thought, I guess, really by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar here, that it still centers Black lives in a way here to say it matters, not only the lives matter, but it matters how those lives are lived, and how one conducts your lives, and it can't be about just projecting hatred that the right wing would be perfectly satisfied in displaying themselves and doing that work for them. And that certainly one of the things that you should be able to glean from standing up for your own rights is how hurtful it is to have them denied to you, no matter who you are.
Right. I mean, I thought, Kareem's piece was absolutely incredible and heartfelt, and he really, it was much more important for him to say it than for me to say it, right? Which is why much of my article was about looking at what Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was saying, looking at Jamel Hill, looking at Elsie Granderson, looking at Roxane Gay. But that was, I think you're absolutely right, and Jamel Hill actually had also said exactly what you said. They're part of. She thinks that certainly part of the initial hesitation is, well, hey, look, we are focused on this right now, and this is the crisis right now, and we maybe we shouldn't say anything negative about anything that any African American is doing, because we don't want to distract the momentum, and I understand that. Of course, intellectually you understand that, but thankfully, other voices, or not other voices, because Jamel Hill is one of those voices. She also made the argument that we can't fall into that sort of trap that that wrong is wrong, and that wrong causes harm, you're not all lives mattering something when you have another group that's facing violence and hate crimes saying, please don't add to that hate. That's very different from Trump saying, oh, all lives matter, and there's a lot of exploiting these phrases, obviously. But it's very different to say, obviously the example of, well, my house is on fire. Well, all houses matter. That's very different. But here you're talking about somebody setting, yes, Black Lives Matter, and that house is on fire. But here you have some individual African Americans starting some other fires, some actual fires, and thankfully people came along to put those out, and necessary and helpful and moral and courageous.
Yes.
And so we want to recognize that courage and the importance of what they're doing. You can make all kinds of arguments. You can say, well, because of what all they're going through, these kind of remarks are just, they're just absorbing it from the larger, white supremacist movement, but all of those things take away agency. These are examples of people who chose to say these things, not even because they were asked about them. I mean, Deshaun Jackson just started posting stuff. Ice Cube just started posting stuff. And then one other piece that's important. This is not to say that people, Ice Cube, Stephen Jackson, Deshaun Jackson, Nick Cannon, that they represent black people. That this represents, the idea that the black community is anti-Semitic, or that they speak for black people. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They speak for themselves as individuals. And as individuals, they have agency, they chose to do these things. And then they also chose to apologize and take positive steps. And that, again, showing the importance of that, which shows you that they're not sort of stone cold haters. David Duke is not going to apologize for making an anti-Semitic statement, because David Duke wants those anti-Semitic statements to be spread and believed. These guys don't want those things to, they said them out of ignorance, not out of malice. I think in most of these cases, Ice Cube is, I think, a separate issue, which is why he went after Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. After Kareem Abdul-Jabbar posted his article, Ice Cube attacked Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's criticisms using anti-Semitic rhetoric. Like, that's why I said he tripled down. Ice Cube did. But the other guys were great, and the other guys, even if it took them a little while to get to the right place, they did. So that's important. It's an important issue. And even just specifically to Daily Kos, I wanted the readers of Daily Kos to see this, to see that we're grappling, we being blacks and Jews together are grappling with these issues. They're not going unnoticed. They're not being ignored, and they shouldn't be ignored. I always think an airing of these things is healthier because it allows for healing. Whereas if it's not talked about, then nobody, in the shadows is where the uninformed resentments grow.
Certainly true, and that highlights the issue. And actually, I was thinking when you were using I always thought a really easy to understand example, counter narrative to the easy trope of all lives matter. It was the houses on fire. I think we've all seen that one where a house on fire and somebody else responds, well, all houses matter, and spraying the hose on a house that's not on fire. And I thought maybe that gave us a good way of illustrating what's going on here is when you said what's at issue here. And we're not trying to all lives matter this thing, but to use that parallel, fire matters. That's true. You can't light things on fire. Water matters, the healing that comes afterwards, and it's very specifically not about the houses. It's about the danger of the fire and of putting it out. So you don't necessarily need to do things that way or to respond to it that way by saying you're trying to center the wrong lives here. Same lives can be centered here. It's just we don't want to make things worse for anybody. This is if it needs to be, if it's a movement about making things better for anyone, then you'll want to avoid making things worse purposefully for others. And it seems to make sense to me. It doesn't detract, I don't think, from the message, but it is a delicate thing. And I'm glad, and I guess this whole piece is a celebration of the fact that, again, even in the middle of, especially in the middle of Black Lives Matter resurgence, the voices here are the ones that were seeking to be centered to begin with. These are black voices and important ones, and thankful for their bravery in stepping forward, because it wasn't required of them, and there's a lot at risk, obviously. A counterattack, as you mentioned, from Ice Cube on Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of all people. That must have been an interesting decision for him to make, but okay. Right.
I mean, I hope that these voices will have a positive impact. I think
I'm
they
sure
will.
They do.
And it's not about saying, again, it's not about saying black people are responsible for everything other black people say, right? That's clearly not the point.
Right, and there was no call for where are the moderates to step forward.
Right. I mean, I do think that there is a sense
unnecessary.
Right. There is a proper sense that we've seen with Black Lives Matter movement that white people have a responsibility to root out white racism, right? White people have to have these conversations with other white people. And if there's a sense of that, we're getting at the same thing here. That's what we're saying is, Jews are not going to be able to root anti-Semitism out of the black community such to the level that it exists. And Jews are also not going to be able to root it out of the white nationalist community, to the degree that exists. People are going to have to, in those communities, are the only ones who can do that work. Again, it's not their responsibility, let's say, but it's certainly a good thing to do, and people who want to make the world a better place are going to do it. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to celebrate and praise these folks who did it. And there were many of them. More of them came out from the time I started working on the piece. When I started working on the piece, I had Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and I had Roxanne Gay and I had the guys from the Steelers. And then as I was working on the piece, because it takes this is probably the longest piece I've ever written, daily, because it's almost 4,000 words.
Yeah.
As I was working on it, more voices started coming out, and I also started finding more voices. But some of them came out. The Nick Cannon thing hadn't even started when I first conceived of the piece, so people responded to that. So it was an ongoing story, and it not to oversimplify things, but it had a better and better ending as I was working on the story. The ending got better and better.
Interesting. Yeah, and the story has been. Well, there's a long arc to it. There's also, I've noticed, a lot of really interesting and insightful additions to the discussion from Jews of color who have their own conflicts and who have spoken up, and we've seen a lot of voices elevated in that discussion. We got another break coming up here, and I don't know what your schedule is like, but certainly if there were any other wrap-up points, you're welcome to some time on the other side. But if not, I want to thank you for spending this long time with us, and hope that you'll come back again, and we'll see what the answer to the surprise question is after this break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Ian is still with us, so we felt like it was too abrupt to simply wrap things up right then and there. And so I wanted at least to bring you back to the other side to, well, like I did during the break, wish you well during our pandemic. You're still right in the heart of New York, where things have thankfully gotten a lot better. But my hope is that everything stays good and people continue to fight things and fight the disease and not let go or give up due to fatigue. I hope you haven't seen any of that where you are.
No, I haven't really. I mean, at least here in New York, people are wearing their masks anytime they're close to anybody else, outside.
Good.
It's heartening. People are taking it seriously. We've shown, not just New York, but really the Northeast has shown the rest of the country that COVID can be contained if you do the work. So let's hope that the rest of the country does the work. I mean, we're going to make some permanent changes, and we're going to have some temporary changes, but we're going to have some permanent changes in the way we live, even past the vaccine. And we've just got to do it, because we can't open the economy if people don't feel safe enough to go to work.
Right. Well, having an economy that's open with no one consuming is not. It doesn't work that way. There needs to be demand as well. We learned about that. All right. Well, I wanted to sort of offhandedly wish you the best with that and hope everything goes well, and hang in there. But I appreciate your coming by and discussing both topics. And remind us again, the third one that's in draft form coming up. Are we going to see it this Sunday or sometime thereafter?
I don't know when, because of the vagaries of the schedule. Mm-hmm. It's not as regular. I used to be Sunday. This one, what's today? Friday. My guess is it'll probably be more like early next week, just because of the editing process. Yeah. But it will have a title something along the lines of, just imagine what we could be doing on COVID if Trump didn't give away, or maybe depending on how saucy we're feeling, we'll have it as didn't piss away our rate, our $1 billion in tax cuts to the rich. And I look at how Germany handled things in terms of fiscal spending, fiscal policy, and not blowing money on a big tax cut during an economic boom, for example. And I also talk about Biden's plans on taxes and try to bring it around to 2020, because even though even the anti-Semitism article was about Trump somewhat, this article is much more about electoral politics than the one we've been talking about the last half hour.
Okay, well, much on everyone's mind, so we'll be looking forward to that one. I appreciate your spending this much time with us on these things. But as you mentioned, that was a real epic effort. What did you say, 4,000 words? It was pretty lengthy. I was going through it last night and saying, this is tremendous work here. So I appreciate your giving it the time that it needed, for explaining. And there's a lot of, delicate points to be made. And some things that need to be stated outright right up at the top, as you did. This is, what this is not about is just as important as you got to get that out of the way so that you can get to the finer points. So I appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
It's my pleasure. And then if I could just, folks, I'm on Daily Kos pretty regularly, so you guys can find me there. You can also, I guess, follow me on Twitter, although pretty much anything I do on Twitter is already on Daily Kos. And if anyone is interested, my last book, my most recent book, is called The Tribalization of Politics: How Rush Limbaugh's Race-Baiting Rhetoric on the Obama Presidency Paved the Way for Trump, and that's available, on Amazon and all your famous online booksellers, and probably not in bookstores any longer. It's been out quite a few months, but I'd be thrilled to hear from anybody who's got the book and wants to get in touch.
Yeah, I would appreciate knowing about whether that happens through the radio show in particular. But we've had a chance a couple of times to discuss the book itself, and of course, the topic of the book. It couldn't be any clearer. Its importance right now, every day. We can at least, well, I guess if you're going to credit Trump for anything, he has never let down on this singular focus on demonstrating the danger of Rush Limbaugh and of people who listen to him and take cues from him. It couldn't be made any clearer, and this presidency has made it. And I look forward both to the end of the presidency and I guess one day soon, I hope, the end of Rush Limbaugh's broadcast as well. But
well, that is something to look forward to.
Yes.
Both counts.
All right. Well, crossing our fingers. But again, thanks for coming by and for laying out the cases that you've made so clearly. Oh, and I want to remind everybody too that I'll have a link or two for you on that 1924 nomination process and presidential contest. As Ian told me during one of the breaks, I checked this out. I just wanted to make sure I didn't dream this up myself, but it's true. So those of you who are history buffs will get your dose of history from our favorite historian as well. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks for having me, David.
All right, take care. We'll catch up with you again soon. And again, appreciate it. Thanks so much for all the time today.
You got it.
All right, well, we'll see you again next time. And moving on then to, I guess, the other items that we have socked away in pocket. Let's see, I also have to sort out in between those that are long reads and those we can make short work of. I guess among the shorter items to share with you that I didn't get to the other day, an AP piece sums this up. Judge orders Michael Cohen to be released from prison. I don't know if we got all caught up with Michael Cohen. Of course, he was released from prison due to worries about spread of COVID-19 in prison facilities. And then in the meantime, we decided that all the kids should go back to school. We did not decide that. The president has decided that. We'll see him back off of that in the next coming days as well, I'm sure, along with other things that he's had to back out of. As a matter of fact, reminds me of another story that I didn't tuck away, but we can discuss: the cancellation of the Jacksonville Republican Convention. But let me get you through this here. The judge ordered, originally, Cohen was released, and then he was spotted, though he was supposed to be on house arrest, spotted dining out at a restaurant in New York City, which I'm still not clear whether or not that was an explicit violation of the terms of his release. However, he was sent back to prison, and despite the worries about COVID-19. And now the latest twist, he's out again. And, your initial response to it maybe, although by now, of course, you probably have heard some of the story and you realize that there's a twist to it. But initially, people were saying, he's out again. What the hell's going on here? We just sent him in for violating the terms of his release, and now he's out again. Who's pulling strings for this guy? But this is interesting. Well, here's the full background, I think, or at least most of it, from AP. A judge on Thursday ordered the release of President Donald Trump's former personal lawyer from prison, saying, not that we were trying to do him a favor, but that the government retaliated against him for planning to release a book critical of Trump before November's election. I don't know if that's what he was discussing when he was in the restaurant, but basically the story here is that the premise for sending him back to prison, whether it was based on violation of the terms of his release or something else, it turns out that the judge became convinced that the prosecutors were making up excuses about his behavior so that they could send him back to prison. And the chief aim of doing it was to prevent the publication of a book critical of Trump before November. That's when you take that by itself and hold it up to the light and realize, wow, I mean, that's a fairly significant First Amendment situation here, prior restraint. But they found a different mechanism. They didn't go straight at trying to prevent the publication of the book. They instead took the roundabout route of sending him back to prison, where honestly he belongs. He should be serving this sentence. That's true. COVID-19 notwithstanding, I was never sure how I felt about seeing him released from prison because of the threat of the disease, but without resolving that question, this is pretty interesting. Michael Cohen's First Amendment rights were violated when he was ordered back to prison on July 9th after probation authorities said he refused, and this was the real issue, I guess, refused to sign a form banning him from publishing the book or communicating publicly in other manners, according to District Judge Alvin Hellerstein. The order then from Hellerstein is Cohen gets released from prison to home confinement by 2 p.m. on Friday. So that's today. So, well, I don't know. Well, I guess we'll see it happen. I don't see any real reason why the Trump administration benefits from violating the judge's order, but they have been known to ignore judicial orders in the past. I don't know if this is a subject on which they will do so, but interesting. So the judge asking prosecutors during the telephone conference during which he issued his order, how can I take any other inference than that it's retaliatory? Hellerstein asked prosecutors, who insisted in court papers, and again Thursday, that the probation department officers didn't know about the book when they wrote a provision of home confinement that severely restricted Cohen's public communications. I've never seen such a clause in 21 years of being a judge and sentencing people and looking at terms of supervised release. Why would the Bureau of Prisons ask for something like this unless there was a retaliatory purpose? It's not, I guess, in other words, ordinarily the case that people released to home confinement are gagged and have restrictions placed on their ordinary First Amendment communications. In ruling, Hellerstein said that he made the finding that the purpose of transferring Mr. Cohen from furlough and home confinement to jail is retaliatory. He added, it's retaliatory for his desire to exercise his First Amendment rights to publish the book. Cohen sued federal prison officials and Attorney General William Barr on Monday, still a lawyer, I guess, saying he was ordered back to prison because he was writing a book. And the book's title, Disloyal, The True Story of Michael Cohen, maybe, former personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump. Terrible title, but okay. And I doubt that it's the true story of anything, but whatever. And I guess there's, looming in the background is, we don't like societally, where you tend to get upset about the idea of somebody profiting off of book sales, which are confessional about the crimes that they committed, essentially. And New York is particularly sensitive about that and has been in the past. Anyway, just sounds interesting. We'll see what comes of it. The Bureau of Prisons issued a spirited defense of its intentions after the ruling on Thursday, calling any assertion that the re-imprisonment of Cohen was a retaliatory action is patently false. It said the terms of his home confinement were determined by the U.S. Probation Office, which is run by the courts rather than the Bureau. During this process, not that it matters very much in the Trump era. During this process, Mr. Cohen refused to agree to the terms of the program, specifically electronic monitoring, which that would be a problem ordinarily in a prison release. In addition, he was argumentative, nothing new there, was attempting to dictate the conditions of his monitoring, including conditions relating to self-employment, access to media, use of social media, and other accountability measures. The statement said. The Bureau of Prisons also said it was not uncommon for it to place restrictions on inmates' contact with the media. Still, it said Cohen's refusal to agree to those conditions or his intent to publish a book played no role whatsoever, maybe, in his return to prison. In a written declaration, Cohen said the book will provide graphic and unflattering details about the president's behavior behind closed doors, including a description of anti-Semitic and virulently racist remarks against black leaders, including President Barack Obama and Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first black president. He said he worked openly on his manuscript until May at Otisville's prison library and discussed his book with prison officials. So you can write the book in prison. That seems to be no problem. They just don't want him writing it at home. He said he was told in April that a lawyer for the Trump Organization, where he worked for a decade, was claiming that he was barred from publishing his book by a non-disclosure agreement. Cohen disputes that, though I would have a hard time believing that he's the one guy who escaped Trump Organization's NDAs. Cohen has been in isolation at an Otisville, New York prison camp, quarantined while prison authorities ensure he does not have the coronavirus. Prosecutors declined through a spokesperson to comment on Hellerstein's ruling. Cohen's attorney, Danya Perry, I'm guessing is how she pronounced Danya, said in a statement that Hellerstein's order was a victory for the First Amendment, hooray, First Amendment, and showed the government cannot block a book critical of the president as a condition of release from home confinement. This principle transcends politics. Well, that's good. I'm glad something's transcending politics again. And we are gratified that the rule of law prevails, at least in small instances. Cohen was initially released in May along with other prisoners as authorities tried to slow the spread of COVID-19 in federal prisons. He was 1 year into a 3-year prison sentence after pleading guilty to campaign finance charges and lying to Congress, among other crimes. Campaign finance charges, of course, stemmed from his efforts to arrange payouts during the election to keep the porn actress Stormy Daniels and model Karen McDougal from making public claims of extramarital affairs with Trump. Trump, by the way, I don't know if you know this, has denied the affairs, just like Stephen Miller is denying that his grandmother died of COVID-19 for political reasons. Not sure where those are coming from exactly or what he hopes to gain from it. I thought he would be relishing the opportunity to demonstrate his cruelty and callousness. That article, as I mentioned, reported in Mother Jones. David Korn put that one together. I don't know whether it's worth sorting through the whole thing or not, but just to give you, I guess, we'll dive in and see whether it interests us to finish out the whole thing. I think the headline says quite a lot. Stephen Miller's grandmother died of COVID-19. Her son blames the Trump administration. And subheader, pull quote here, with the death of my mother, I'm angry and outraged at Miller, Stephen Miller. This month, Stephen Miller, the extremist anti-immigrant Trump advisor who has promoted white nationalist ideas, lost a relative to the coronavirus pandemic, and his uncle tells Mother Jones that the Trump administration is partly to blame for this death. On July 4th, David Glosser, the brother of Miller's mother, posted a Facebook note announcing the death of his mother, Ruth Glosser, who was Miller's maternal grandmother. This morning, he said, my mother, Ruth Glosser, died of the late effects of COVID-19 like so many thousands of other people, both young and old. She survived the acute infection but was left with lung and neurological damage that destroyed her will to eat and her ability to breathe well enough to sustain arousal and consciousness. Over an 8-week period, she gradually slipped away and died peacefully this morning. David Glosser is a retired neuropsychologist and a passionate Trump critic who has publicly decried Miller for his anti-immigrant policies, and he contends that Trump's lack of response to the coronavirus led to the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans who might otherwise have survived. In an interview, he says, "With the death of my mother, I'm angry and outraged at," and it's bracketed here, Miller. I don't know whether he said Stephen or what, but I'm outraged at Miller directly and the administration he has devoted his energy to supporting. In response to a request seeking comment from Miller, a White House spokesperson sent Mother Jones this statement: "This is categorically false and a disgusting use of so-called journalism." I guess you can tell it's actually true here just by this level of vitriol. "So-called journalism when the family deserves privacy," though they didn't ask for it, I guess, "to mourn the loss of a loved one. His grandmother did not pass away from COVID. She was diagnosed with COVID in March and passed away in July, so that timeline does not add up at all, except that there's plenty of people who have remained sick with the after effects of a COVID infection for that much time. His grandmother died peacefully in her sleep from old age. I would hope that you would choose not to go down this road." Well, guess what? They went down the road anyway. Glosser, a former health professional, posted his mother's death announcement, so not asking for a whole lot of privacy here. At least he isn't. Maybe other members of the family are offended. Who knows? Posted his mother's death announcement on a public Facebook page. Responding to the White House statement, he writes in an email, "Keeping the tragic facts about COVID deaths of our countrymen and women, young and old, from the American public serves no purpose other than to obscure the need for a coherent, national, scientifically based public health response to save others from this disease." Oh well. "My mother led a long, satisfying, and productive life of family and community service. She had nothing to be ashamed of, and concealing her cause of death to offer privacy to me, our family, her hundreds of relatives and friends, does nothing to assuage our regret at her loss. Moreover," this is the, I guess, the end of the quote here. "Moreover, Ruth Glosser's death certificate, which her son shared with Mother Jones, lists her cause of death as respiratory arrest resulting from COVID-19. So I guess that'll work some magic for you in court if necessary. Informed that Ruth Glosser's death certificate cited COVID-19, the White House spokesperson replied, "Again, this is categorically false. Don't look at the certificate. Not real. She had a mild case," although he actually, I guess in email said she had a mild case, but probably meant mild case of COVID-19 in March. "She was never hospitalized and made a full and quick recovery, minus the death," I guess. Miller has played a role in the Trump White House's ineffectual response to the coronavirus. That too, eh? He was credited, if you can call it that, with helping to write the Oval Office address Trump delivered on March 11th that was widely panned. In that speech, Trump branded the coronavirus as the foreign virus and downplayed the damage already caused by it. He hailed his administration's actions regarding the growing pandemic, ignoring his recent and repeated efforts to dismiss the threat posed by the virus. Trump announced in that speech that he would suspend all travel from Europe to the United States, a statement that caused panic as Americans overseas rushed back to the U.S. and ended up in crammed and unsafe conditions at U.S. airports. The ban, of course, ended up only applying to foreign citizens, even though the virus doesn't care who carries it. In the months since, Miller has attempted to exploit the pandemic to implement anti-immigration measures. On Facebook, Glosser described his 97-year-old mother as a scholar, a social worker, and the teacher of a generation of social work students in western Pennsylvania who founded and administered a foster parents program for children with special needs in Johnstown. He added her passion was the careful documentation of the Glosser family and its flight from Tsarist persecution in what is now Belarus to life and freedom in the USA. An ardent advocate of education, women's rights, and the struggle for civil rights in the USA. In an addendum to the post, he pointed out that she had depended on immigrants for her health care. He adds, "I neglected to mention that in Mom's declining years, she was lovingly cared for by health aid nurses and doctors also from India, Philippines, Mexico, Nicaragua, Haiti, Korea, El Salvador, Uganda, and Nigeria. Immigrants all." and I'm indebted to them for helping us through some very difficult times. Without them, there would be no one to take care of our elderly. Another interesting point as well. All right, at this point, we may take a pause in our reading of this piece. I recommend the rest of it to you, perhaps something you want to take a look at over the weekend, but you probably need no more convincing that Stephen Miller's a bit of a psychopath. So we'll stop at this point. Let's see. Other things that we want to catch up on. We haven't had a chance to even mention, I don't think, the incredible bribery scandal among Ohio Republicans. You probably caught wind of the fact that, was it over the weekend or was it just earlier in the week? I can no longer recall exactly. All the days melt together. But you may have seen news reports or Twitter reports of what they just said early morning, like FBI activity outside of the home of the Speaker of the State House, Larry Householder. Why Pressholder? I have no idea why I got that from, but Larry Householder. And at any rate, I grabbed this Twitter thread from Matthew Chapman, who tweets as, you remember, Fawful fan or F-awful fan. I've never been sure how you would read that out loud, but F-A-W-F-U-L, F-awful, and then fan. But Matthew, I guess, had an interesting insight into this story, and you may follow him on Twitter as well. He's as he describes himself in his profile, game programmer, yes, true, but also breaking news reporter at Raw Story. And I guess he had a particular interest in this story and explains some good background from it, and I thought I'd share it with you. I think most people who don't live in Ohio, and I guess he does, don't get how big the Larry Householder scandal is. I don't know if I ever actually located him in Ohio, and I think probably I thought of him as living elsewhere, and I thought he was more Western, but maybe I'm just fooled by the hat. Anyway, he's got this to say. Yes, Householder allegedly laundered a $60 million bribe from lobbyists, that's a big one, through a dark money group. And that's bad, all by itself, but this is where it gets interesting. But the bigger story is what he got bribed to do. And I think that was the initial discussion. Well, look at the size of that bribe. That's outrageous. But, okay. I mean, not like it was all right and easily dismissed or anything. But a lot of the focus was on how much money was involved. But check this out. Here's what he was actually bribed to do. Last year, Ohio passed HB 6, which has been called one of the worst energy bills of the 21st century. Energy money behind this. It bailed out several failing coal and nuclear plants, wiped out renewable energy subsidies, and canceled a $4 billion program to help Ohioans make energy efficiency upgrades. A lot of people were pissed off about that bill. It didn't just hurt the environment, it hurt working people. It hurt small businesses, it hurt large businesses. That bill was almost tailor-made to force everyone to pay more to utility companies. So now this comes into focus, right? $60 million is an awfully large bribe. Well, what if you were going to make hundreds of millions of dollars off of this? Isn't a $60 million kickback worth doing? So let's see here. He includes a link to a Vox article, which is no doubt an explainer, because that's what Vox does. Ohio just passed the worst energy bill of the 21st century, explaining the bill at the time. But Matthew goes on. The allegation from federal prosecutors is that the $60 billion, I wish it was, right? $60 billion, I'd get a piece of that. $60 million bribe that Householder accepted, it's huge, was facilitated by lobbyists from First Energy, who were basically the only ones leaning on him to pass this bill. So unpopular, did horrible things, made no political sense, and only one company really particularly interested in this. So I guess you can see why the bribe had to be so large. And he continues on, there needs to be a much broader reckoning than just the criminal charges against Householder. It does sound like the sort of bribe that was meant to be passed around and shared and parceled out to others. So I'm sure you'll find some others guilty as well. There needs to be a much broader reckoning than just criminal charges against Householder. Governor Mike DeWine signed the bill. A majority of the Republicans in the state House and Senate passed it. So many hands are dirty here. Everyone should have to answer for it. And incredibly, that energy bill might just be the beginning. Federal prosecutors also think Householder solicited bribes, he needed more, from payday lenders and nursing homes in exchange for favorable legislation. The Ohio legislature's entire term looks tainted. And here he includes something from the Columbus Dispatch. The feds say Householder's pay-to-play scheme extended beyond House Bill 6. I'm sure there's plenty to be discovered there. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. One last segment left to go here, although I'm intrigued looking at this always happens. Anytime I see something vaguely interesting and start reading it and saying, wow, we should share this with everybody. There's so much happening in the world and so much to comment on. I took a look here, though, at the Columbus Dispatch reporting on this, and it looks like this is just part of a suite of articles that they have on it, and I guess I would recommend that everybody spend a little bit of time on this. We don't focus enough on our state legislatures in this country, on this show, but it's I think the lack of attention paid to the somehow I guess it's considered the unsexy business of governing smaller political units, whether state or local units, doesn't seem to matter. But the interest. It's funny because as the influence on your daily life rises, the interest in monitoring what's going on falls. And when you very often some of the most outrageous and insidious corruption, it ends up happening at the lower levels. And I think it's because, well, for one thing, the politicians tend to be somewhat, on average, a little bit less experienced, but also I think they're very fully aware of how little attention they really get. And that, I guess, could be the topic for another day, but I think that drives a lot of what's behind the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, and how they do business. People aren't paying attention to that stuff, and it's much, much easier than it would be on the federal level, I think, to just simply write proposed legislation inside of the corporate office suites and hand it over to state legislators, very often who work part-time, and just say, just put your name on it. And you know, you can be assured of industry support for it, and so therefore political donations from these industries. And if you don't know what you're doing and don't know how to legislate, you can just do this and it'll make you look smart. And if that's not enough for you, we got $60 million we can distribute to you. Take a look at this thing. Randy Ludlow for the Columbus Dispatch writing on here, and then they include all these other angles from which they've covered the situation for you to look through. Ohio House Speaker Larry Householder's alleged pay-to-play scheme to pass legislation for special interests extended beyond House Bill 6 and its $1 billion ratepayer bailout of a pair of ailing nuclear power plants. Householder and charged co-conspirator Neil Clark, a lobbyist, are portrayed in a federal affidavit as engaging in an active effort to solicit big, secretive checks in exchange for favorable consideration of bills. And straight up corruption, right? Everyone understands that kind of corruption. The Perry County Republican talked of adding money from the payday loan, nursing home, and other industries to the $60 million funneled by First Energy to Generation Now, the dark money nonprofit householder allegedly controlled to defend House Bill 6 from a repeal attempt. Interesting. So another wrinkle in there. An affidavit from an FBI agent detailing the federal racketeering charges against Householder and his alleged co-conspirators reveals that other non-energy interests paid nearly $2.9 million into Generation Now, which was not required to reveal its donors. And here they sort of take a pause and embed their related content. A July 23rd piece, a timeline of the Larry Householder bribery case, in case you'd like to get up to speed on that. And then 2 pieces from July 22nd, Larry Householder investigation, the nuts and bolts. And Senator Sherrod Brown blames GOP single-party rule for the corruption case. And good idea. They probably thought that they were unassailable because they had single-party control of the entirety of Ohio's government. Now, continuing with the article here, in a 2019 recorded meeting, Clark, the co-conspirator lobbyist here, discussed making soft money payments to Householder relating to the passage of legislation unrelated to HB 6, the affidavit states. Clark, who represented both payday lending and nursing home interests as a lobbyist, stated Householder wanted to see the checks from special interests in person before they landed at Generation Now. The longtime GOP-aligned lobbyist talked of the size of the expected checks, a noticeable number, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 to Gen Now, and hand-deliver the checks to the speaker, the affidavit quotes Clark. That's dumb. In a January 10th, 2018 phone call with Clark, recorded by the FBI, it's a long time coming on this bust here, Householder, who was not yet speaker, said, "So we are looking at payday lenders, and we are expecting big things in Generation Now money from payday lenders. So far, I think we are, $50,000, I think," Householder said. How did they get to the $60 million from this? Clark replied, according to the affidavit, "You should have gotten $20,000 or $50,000 from the owner of the firm, correct?" Householder answered yes, before confirming with someone in the room that it was only $25,000. Oh, disappointing. In an August 19, 2019 phone call captured by federal authorities, Clark talked of making a road trip with Householder or his advisors to pick up a check and advance unspecified legislation. Clark said the targeted individuals might write a check to Generation Now totaling $50,000, again saying it should personally be handed to Householder. The federal affidavit claims the alleged pay-to-play scheme dated to 2017, the first year of Householder's return to the State House after his earlier tenure as Speaker in the early 2000s. He became Speaker again in 2019. Subpoenaed bank records from Generation Now match recorded conversations between Householder and Clark about the president of a payday lending company writing a $25,000 check on October 18th, 2017, and a $30,000 check from an unidentified party the next day. But Householder's apparent designs on helping out the payday loan industry apparently were thwarted by the last House Speaker to confront controversy and scandal. While denying wrongdoing, then Speaker Cliff Rosenberger resigned on April 12, 2018, as the FBI investigated overseas trips he took with payday lending lobbyists. No criminal charges have ever surfaced there. Less than 2 months later, eager to dispel the notion that the fix was in, the Republican-dominated House passed a bill to impose major restrictions on the industry and place caps on what were called the nation's highest interest rates in excess of 500% on small short-term loans. Catherine Terser, executive director of the good government group Common Cause Ohio, called for lawmakers to improve campaign finance disclosures and shine a light to expose dark money and end pay-to-play. I mean, that's a nice call. But where do we get to the $60 million situation? I guess we'd have to find it in one of the other related articles. But, I mean, that's an extraordinary boost from hoping for $50,000 checks and getting $25,000 checks to $60 million. And he clearly meant to distribute, I would think, part of that money. That's possession with intent to distribute when you get to $60 million. Although it did put me in mind of the fact that he ascends to the speakership in the middle of all this through the use of an outside dark money group, this Generation Now. And I'm wondering, is that just essentially the equivalent of a leadership PAC at the state legislative level? Which brings me back to the fact that there's a looming contest for the chairmanship in the House of the House Foreign Relations Committee, now that Eliot Engel has been defeated in his primary. And we discussed the fact that Greg Meeks and Brad Sherman facing off for that gavel. And we've had an addition to the contest. And I don't think I ever came back with my my analysis of which of the two contestants here was the more likely to prevail based on my formula of looking at the money that they have dispersed to other members through their leadership PAC. And the answer here is that Brad Sherman holds the edge. And I thought it was pretty convincing. I thought it looked pretty close in terms of the raw numbers when I just looked at how much have they dispersed over the years from their PACs. But when I broke it down into, well, how much money have they given to how many members who are still there, who will have a vote if they win their re-election, although they may have this contest sooner. I'm not sure when they plan to hold the vote on that. But anyway, Sherman held a much more considerable edge, and I'm looking around to see if the notes are readily available. And I see my work on them, but I don't think where have I written out the conclusion? I'm not really sure. But anyway, it looked to me like Sherman had been doing the contributing for much longer, had given out more money, and spent it on people who had been more successful in winning election and retaining their seats so that they'll be around to vote. So the newest entrant, I think Joaquin Castro, has declared his interest in it too, and is explicitly trying to make an ideological race of it, saying that there really needs to be a more progressive chair of the House Foreign Relations Committee. Historically, though, well, I don't know. I'm not certain how I would put it, but you know how I've made the argument here. Ideology rarely turns out to be, I think, the deciding factor, or at least it's correlated much less than money is with these things. And so I took a look. Joaquin Castro's contributions are of a much shorter duration. He's just been in Congress a lot less time, and he's spent a lot less money, although I haven't given the granular attention to on whom has he spent the money. And like I said, the quick and dirty analysis of just how much have they dispersed from their leadership PACs over the years doesn't exactly do justice, since a lot of it is used to pay for office space and fundraising expenses and other expenses of maintaining, administrative costs of maintaining the PAC. Not all of it goes to other members of Congress. And then, of course, there's the members of Congress you spend money on who later lose their election. In 2000, say you funded them through the 2014 election cycle, but then they retire or lost an election or move on to the Senate, for that matter, and won't have a vote in the House Democratic caucus on the question of who should take the gavel. Anyway, we'll see. It'll be very interesting if, for once, ideology actually drives that choice, and it will be a surprise to everyone. If it does, I'm not ruling it out, but I'll just say it'll be an interesting departure from the historical, the traditional explanation for how people rise to those leadership posts. And I guess, anyway, that came to mind as I was reading about Householder here, and how he, in returning to the State House, had eyes on regaining the speakership, and apparently, made a play right from the beginning to fill the coffers of his soft money organization on the side, and probably was looking to, buy his way back into the leadership that way. It's one of the unfortunate side effects of handling things this way. And by the way, if you take a look at Open Secrets and look at opensecret.org, where they keep all of these records, and you can find the records of various members and their leadership PACs. They also offer a very quick and easy to find analysis of where the majority of the money for that leadership PAC comes from. If you think you can glean something from the source of the funds, or you maybe just want to compare the various candidates and where they get their money and which one may or may not be more or less suspect based on where that money came from. Yeah, interesting angle on that question. All right, a short story that maybe follows the previous gigantic Republican corruption story. Matt Gaetz appears to run afoul, they say, of House ethics rules in Politico. The Florida Republican spent thousands of dollars on a speech writing consultant, which is actually apparently disallowed under House rules, but a very particular speech writing consultant. Jake Sherman and John Bresnahan reported this the other day. Gaetz has privately engaged in several spending practices in his nearly 4 whopping years in office, federal office anyway, that appear to be in conflict with the House's ethics rules. Gaetz, a close ally of Trump's, as you know, from the Florida Panhandle, improperly sent tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars to a limited liability company linked to a speechwriting consultant who was ousted from the Trump administration in direct conflict with House rules. It's not the rule that you can't hire people who have been ousted by the administration, but rather spending money on outside consultants is very strictly limited because, why? Because people tended in the old days to hire consultants like their wives or their cousins or their brothers and use taxpayer funds and office funds to do that, and just would say, well, I didn't get very much for my money, but it was a totally legal exchange. Anyway, in another possible violation, a private company installed a television studio in his father's Niceville, Florida home, which Gaetz uses when he appears on television. So if you wonder why is he all over TV, how is it that he's able to do this, especially in times of COVID-19, where we're not supposed to be running around from studio to studio. It's a relatively dangerous thing, and they still find Fox and their morning crew broadcasting from their homes. Well, Fox paid to put television studios in their homes so that they could put out a quality produced product via TV every day, and that's what Gaetz did. And how interesting is it, by the way, that he put it in his father's home? The guy doesn't even maintain his own house. But then again, he's like 12 years old. So he built the television studio in his father's home so that he could do television hits from home without having to go to the studios. But he paid for it with taxpayer money. And in a very interesting and intricate scheme, too. Taxpayers foot the bill to rent the television camera. And the private company that built the studio, which Gaetz refuses to identify, oddly enough, takes a fee each time he appears on the air, his office. Now, they charge the fee to, amazingly, I don't know why anybody would pay this, but the television network that's interested in having him on has to pay the fee to the private company that runs the studio that he built with taxpayer dollars in his dad's house. Pretty weird, right? It's unclear how much it cost the private company to construct the studio. This may run afoul of the House gift rule. Oh, okay. He didn't use taxpayer funds to build the studio. He accepted it for free from a private company, which pays itself back by charging fees to the television stations that want to feature Gaetz on their air for some reason. Weird. This may run afoul of the House gift rule, which prohibits any lawmaker, aide, or their family members from accepting gifts worth more than $50. And I think television studios go for slightly more these days. The official definition of a gift is very broad and covers virtually any good or service with monetary value. Gaetz's office denies wrongdoing in both cases. His aides say House Ethics Committee approved both arrangements, but declined to produce any evidence that that was the case. Show us the paperwork. And do you really think they did? Come on. His latest actions suggest a broader pattern by the second-term lawmaker of pushing the bounds of, if not outright defying, restrictions intended to guard against corruption and conflicts of interest, because he wanted to have some corruption and conflict of interest. The Florida Republican concedes that he improperly sent $28,000 in taxpayer funds to a limited liability company connected to the speechwriting consultant Darren Beattie, or Beatty, I don't know how you pronounce it, Beattie, a former White House aide who was ousted after appearing at a convention known as a forum for racist and white supremacist views. Too racist for the Trump White House, got fired. Gates immediately says, I'll hire you. And how proud is he to do that? And how proud is Beatty to accept that money? Not proud enough to simply take the check, but instead he forms an LLC, which he bases in I think they mention in the article here, Wyoming or something that bears no relationship to him at all. So he forms an out-of-state LLC to accept the checks because of how proud he is to do this work on the up and up. Gates's aide says it was a clerical error and they're now working to reverse it. House rules explicitly prohibit spending taxpayer dollars on speechwriting consultants. Just period. Gates's office likewise declined to detail the television studio arrangement or to produce documentation that it was approved. House officials and experts on the chamber's rules said it was extraordinarily unusual and likely violates the gift ban rule. Gates is part of a new breed, they say here, they really soften it. A new breed of Republican official elected in the Trump era, a loud, bombastic voice defending the president, his policies, and allies. It's not a new breed. It's the Newt Gingrich breed. He has a flair for publicity, which they, I guess, note his showing up on a House floor in a gas mask early in the coronavirus crisis, right? But he's been a minor player legislatively. He doesn't pass many bills. He's never been involved with high-stakes negotiations. The media, however, has become enamored with the 38-year-old lawmaker. He's an ardent defender of Roger Stone and lobbied Trump for his pardon. Gates' spending has already been under review. The Office of Congressional Ethics recently dropped an investigation, actually, into Gates' office rental agreement after Politico reported in April that he had rented his office in Pensacola from a longtime friend, political donor, and policy advisor. Both the friend, local businessman Collier Merrill, and Gates said the rental deal was hashed out privately and below market value, which is another separate problem all by itself. Politico began examining Gates' office operations at the beginning of June. In the House's disbursement report, which covers virtually all of the chamber's expenditures, Gates disclosed 14 separate $2,000 payments to Presidential Communications and Strategies, a limited liability company that appeared to be registered by an unidentified agent in a tiny town in Wyoming. The checks, though, are sent to an apartment in Arlington, Virginia, according to sources familiar with the arrangement. Sounds totally legit. I would check into that myself. The payments were to Beatty. According to multiple sources familiar with the arrangements, Gates announced hiring him as a speechwriting advisor in 2019, but he says he was never added to Gates's congressional payroll, according to House disbursement records. Instead, Gates paid him through the Wyoming-based LLC. Speechwriters, communications advisors, and political consultants all fall in the category of outside hires that individual lawmakers are barred from using taxpayer money to retain. Consultants may be hired for some services, including maintenance, janitorial work, or technical assistance. Under special circumstances and with prior approval of House officials, lawmakers may be permitted to hire consultants for legal matters. The agreement involving the speechwriting consultant appears to have begun after Beatty was ousted from the Trump administration after his appearance at the H.L. Mencken Club conference. The Southern Poverty Law Center calls attendees of the conference a band of white nationalists, pseudo-academic, and academic racists. They got actual academic racists. Gates announced on Twitter that he would hire Beatty, who holds a doctorate in political science from Duke University, of course, as a special advisor for speechwriting last April. There may be perceived advantages to staying off the government payroll, including that Beatty would not need to abide by the strict limits on outside income. He didn't respond to a request for comment or notes left at the apartment. After ignoring inquiries about the payments to the arrangement with Beatty for 6 weeks. Gates' office replied last Friday, via Chief of Staff Gillian Lane Wyant, who said, although the contractual arrangement was approved by the necessary House authorities, a second review by the Finance Office determined that the services could not be contracted for in exactly that fashion, and our office is currently working through the best way to proceed with both Finance and the House Ethics Committee. The funds were all immediately returned to the House as soon as the review determined that this was not the right way to structure this, which means it wasn't. This is nothing more than a glorified clerical error, and while it's baffling that Politico should find this newsworthy, it's disappointing. Politico plots to demean individuals who've made an innocent clerical mistake and are working to correct it. Gates was likewise circumspect about the television studio. On July 9th, the Florida Republican's office said he uses his allowable allotment of taxpayer funds to pay $100 per month to rent a camera to communicate with constituents and the nation. It's said the hard costs were covered by a private company, which then charges television networks each time they connect to the studio. Gates, they said, is not involved in those transactions. The $100 fee is not evident in any of the congressman's spending records, and his office did not respond to requests about the private companies profiting off of his television appearances. How all this goes undetected for so long and not enforced against him, I have no idea, but I guess we're just sitting under a pile of ethical violations by Republicans and can never get out from underneath them. All right. Running out of time and space to include more items here, but I'll bring this one to your attention, and maybe we'll read a little bit of it, get a flavor for it before running out of time here. But Carol Cadwalader is back in action. Never really stopped, of course, but she offered up a thread a couple days ago, an explainer for something we haven't paid attention to because it's happening over in the UK. But for the Americans, she gives us a Russia Report explainer. I've gotten an inkling, and perhaps you've gotten more, of what's going on in the UK with the issuance of this report. She puts it this way. Imagine if you'd found out today, and we are finding out just now, that the FBI, CIA, NSA, and every state attorney general had received intelligence about possible Russian interference. I feel like we have learned that. And they did nothing. I feel like that too. And 4 years later, they'd still done nothing. Kind of. And the plan now is to do more nothing. She goes on here to say, and Congress prepared a report condemning all of this, but Trump blocked it before the election, which he'd then won, and then delayed the formation of a new committee, then tried to appoint an patsy, who is U.S. Chris Grayling. I guess I don't know who Chris Grayling is, so I couldn't tell you. Was foiled, and then a new Republican chair defied him to publish. That's today in Britain. So that doesn't really clear very much up for me, but apparently it's an extraordinarily important development in the UK, and everyone is surprised by how this has gone down. So I think we'll make that, we'll see if we can't make that some priority for perhaps weekend reading. I don't know whether this is going to be all that revealing for what we're going through here in the United States, but it's important because these things tended to run in parallel, I think. A lot of these Russian operations in the UK in support of Brexit and Boris Johnson, and what happened here as well. So we'll try and keep one eye at least on what's going on over there. Carol usually does a pretty good job in explaining these things in longer article form, so maybe we'll scrape one of those together and review that over the weekend. Like I said, time now, though, to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and another chance at all of these stories that we haven't had a chance to discuss. Let's see. Well, we'll read over his summation of what he's got in store for you. I guess probably the biggest story that we didn't discuss, the biggest daily story that we didn't discuss yesterday was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's speech on the House floor yesterday. She claimed a point of personal privilege to address her confrontation with Ted Yoho, and gave an interesting, educational, and defiant speech, and rightly so, in rejecting his fake apology. And I think it was interesting to see him called out for the set Republican play, something that you will find in your campaign in a box if you are accused of sexism. You remind everybody that you're married and you value your wife's opinion, and if you have daughters, well, then you can't be a sexist because you're working so hard to protect them in the world, and while calling that out as obvious BS. Well done there by AOC on that one. Really, as I was saying on Twitter yesterday, really the person, woman, man, camera, TV of terrible sexism excuses. It just doesn't work and never made any sense. All right, now on to what's up for justice coming up next. Let's see. Oh, yes, here we are. Of course, the non-apology to AOC is tops on the list. After that, Trump urged suburban housewives, because who else lives in the suburbs than our women, right, to support his plan to bring back segregation, which they've all been clamoring for. Tom Cotton insists schools teach the real history of slavery, and they shouldn't get any federal funding if they do that. And more after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waltman.
Okay, so Tom Cotton, no more truth on slavery, please. And then the Connecticut Supreme Court upheld sanctions against Alex Jones in the Sandy Hook lawsuit. That's good news. Around the world, the first and only president of Belarus threatened to expel Western media over election coverage of his expected sixth term. Chin stroke there. Stay tuned.